Hello, crypto community. Jeff Kerdakis here with Bob Somerville, the executive director of the Ethereum Classic Cooperative. Bob, I'm super excited to be able to have the chance to have this chat with you. So thanks for coming by.
No problem. Glad to be here.
So in the last little while, we've seen a ton of green across the crypto space. I think most of the coins are up like 30%. It's just been, I think Ethereum Classic actually is around up 130% in the last 30 days.
Yep.
So, as you're running a company in the crypto space, how are these market cycles and like whether it's, just a fake out bull run, how is this affecting you and the company?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's just to say, I mean, the other thing is with the Ethereum Classic Cooperative, we're not a company
Yeah,
per se.
right. I misspoke there.
We
Yeah.
are a public charity, not quite a foundation, but that kind of thing. And I mean, the way that it affects us the most is that the majority of our funding comes from Grayscale. So Grayscale have the Ethereum Classic fund, which is a fund holding crypto, which then you stick in your IRS account or basically get market access without holding stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And so they have 3% fees, and they donate a third of that to us. So what that means is when people are enthused about crypto and are putting more money in, we have more funding, for supporting the protocol. And I mean, that's a very intentional decision on their behalf, is as, investors who are seeing returns coming from ETC, what better way to encourage those returns than to invest into the ecosystem that you're building on top of. I mean, I think that's a great kind of model, and I don't know that really exists in any of the other projects that I'm aware of. The majority of projects are either ICO funded,
Mm-hmm.
or they had some other form of a regulated crowd sale or accredited investors or what have you, or they're running on a treasury model,
Yeah.
where some proportion of block rewards is given back to some kind of body that then tries to do something useful with them. That's a hard governance issue. But that isn't the case for us. Ethereum Classic is a truly sort of decentralized ecosystem where there is no single center. Ethereum Classic Cooperative is not the Ethereum Classic Foundation.
Mm-hmm.
There wasn't a crowd sale. We don't get any funding from block rewards. It's purely donations. And the Ethereum Classic trust there is the primary source of funding, but we have had others as well.
Gotcha. And
But
so,
what that
you
does
mentioned
mean
there,
for us- but
yeah,
sorry, yeah, I mean, what that does mean for us is bull markets are good in terms of
right.
having more money to actually work on the protocol, which is what our goal is to promote and to encourage and grow and steward the protocol, and to try and encourage ecosystem to build on top of that and grow the pie for everyone, right? And get to nirvana.
There we go. Yeah. And like you said, the more people, when the bull market is coming in, it's more fruitful for you guys. A lot of new people coming into the space. And I'm sure a lot of people listening in are going to be new to the classic of, Ethereum Classic versus Ethereum. I know a lot of people kind of convolute them. I know you mentioned that there wasn't a crowd sale. And so, with the history of Ethereum Classic, I wonder if you could add a little bit of color to, what
Yeah.
is that history, and, how can you, I guess, what is that claim that there wasn't a crowd sale if I'll let you kind of fill in the blanks there.
Sure.
Yeah.
So I mean, the history is Vitalik Buterin, the Ethereum white paper in December 2013. That was distributed to a bunch of Bitcoiner people, friends and colleagues or interested parties, and they rapidly got to work on going, yeah, that seems like an interesting idea. Let's go and do that thing. So work was started on building 3 clients, and also defining the yellow paper, which is sort of the protocol definition, effectively. So the difference that you had there on Ethereum versus Bitcoin is wanting there to be a specification for the protocol and multiple implementations. What happened on Bitcoin is that you had the Bitcoin Core client, and then that really became the standard. There was never like a specification for that, so it was never really possible for other client implementations to really like get any kind of traction. And then the problem is you've only got one client code base, so the people controlling writing that client have got implicit centralized sort of control, right? You can't really have some other group going, that Bitcoin Core group, they're not really doing a great job. We should write a different client in another language and, have better performance, better whatever. So off you go with 3 clients in a row in the definition. And then there was the crowd sale, with the money being raised in Bitcoin and the funds going to this newly formed Ethereum Foundation, which was then really, it got the mission of like, okay, make this thing happen, right? Go and build it. You've got some work ongoing. Let's get that to done. And then that's the journey that's been ongoing for the last 6 years now with Ethereum. However, there were really always sort of 2 slightly differing visions of Ethereum. So Charles Hoskinson expressed this really well at ETC Summit 2017, which I wasn't around for, but I saw the video of just a few months ago, where he was saying there's a common misperception that 2 Ethereums only happened at the time of the DAO fork, and Ethereum and Ethereum Classic going one way or the other. But the reality is that there were always 2 Ethereums, there were always 2 visions, and they weren't mutually compatible. So the one vision is a very simple one, is sort of a better Bitcoin. So it's saying, wouldn't it be great if you had Bitcoin, but it had smart contracts and you had state, so that, you could do complex, that you could do arbitrarily complicated dApps and stuff. Right. So that's one vision. So that's kind of a limited vision, which is still basically like having a lot of the same kind of philosophical aims as Bitcoin. It's saying, well, look, we do value fixed emissions. We don't want inflationary dynamic. And we do value immutability and security. The second vision was world computer. So world computer is quite a different vision, and it's saying, oh, wouldn't it be great if you could have like a decentralized Amazon Web Services? If you could run, really complicated dApps, and you could do, you could do DAOs, and you could do games, and you could do exchanges, and you could do anything. Now, the thing is, that's really, it's not about hard money at that point. It's really about an application platform. And it's really sort of saying, well, great, so like we've got what we've got, but we need to get to scalability, right? And that's really where this whole kind of like, okay, well, we want to go to Ethereum 2, we want to have Casper, we want to have sharding, we're probably changing the execution engine from EVM to WebAssembly, and how are we going to, maybe we're looking at state rent, and basically you how do you scale this thing? And it's really like a view of Ether as the fuel for the engine, right? It's saying, well, you can use it as money, but it's not really money. Like, really what you're building is an application platform. Now, so those 2 visions were both happening in the same project.
Yeah.
Right. It was all the same people kind of trying to make 2 things. And some people, really, you go, well, you would go to the Ethereum website and it would say, immutable, unstoppable smart contracts, right? With no possibility of censorship or downtime and so on. So a lot of people, coming from Bitcoin world were like, yeah, I can buy that. I don't want people to change Bitcoin. Bitcoin that's my money, that's my digital gold. But I am interested in the potential of like having programmable money as well. But I do want it to be money, right?
Right.
That was very important to that group. The second group is really no, I want world computer. I don't really, like money is not really the motivation. The motivation is having these dApps and being able to do collaboration and build these DAOs and structures and wanting that programmability. But the problem with that application platform size is that does need scaling. It's very evident that Ethereum as it stands and ETC as it stands is not appropriate. It cannot scale. There's things that you can do. So I mean, the DeFi economy, which has sort of come to fruition recently, is a very concrete thing, which obviously works. And that is sort of like a programmable money kind of thing. And it doesn't necessarily require a huge amount of throughput or whatever. It's like, well, hey, here's a thing, and can I make a thing that's a loan or whatever? And it's like you're doing a transaction and you're leaving it, for months or years even.
Right.
Right. So it's not high throughput in the same way as, I'm buying a crypto kitty and clicking and I'm playing a game of poker and here's a hand and poke, right?
Right.
So really what you had that split the communities, it was the DAO and the reaction to the DAO. So for anyone who wasn't around at the time, what the DAO was the DAO. The DAO was effectively the first DAO that came to fruition. And that came about from a company called Slockit, who had many people who used to work at the Ethereum Foundation who, went off and did this thing, which was really around the idea of an Ethereum computer that you could have, sort of like a node running at home that you could be doing stuff with. And Slockit was because it was smart locks. So their applications were like smart locks, smart devices, IoT things, whatever, remotely turning a kettle on and off, buying gas at a gas station, that kind of idea of machine to machine economy and smart devices and that lot tie over. So to fund that, rather than going, well, hey, can you invest money into the Slockit company? They were true believers. So they were like, right, we're going to do this right. We're going to make a DAO, right? And the way this is going to work is everyone's going to put their money in the DAO and we're going to have like proposals and, we'll vote on proposals. And if proposals go through, then the funds will get released. So it's like, right, we're going to be like really humble. So you're not giving the money to us. You're not giving the money to another company even. You're giving the money to the DAO on chain. And like, we are going to be a service provider. And, and if we do what we say, you're going to like release milestone-based payments or whatever to us, and we're going to make this thing. And it just started out with them. And then it's like, oh, but you could do anything with this.
Right.
Like, oh, other people could like do this. And it blew up into, the biggest crowdfunding activity ever in history. So the Ethereum crowd sale itself raised $16 million, which was like, I think the third highest crowdfunding thing that had ever been at that time. Most of them were like Kickstarters. So it was like, whoa, Ethereum's like the third biggest ever. And it's like, yeah, I wonder how much the DAO is going to raise. Is it going to be like, maybe 1 million, maybe 5, maybe 10 million? And it went 20, 30, 50, 100, 150. And it's just like, whoa, what is going on? This is nuts. But what happened was, at the time, all of the technology, all of the tooling and everything was really immature. Like, nobody knew, well, what's best practices or good security things or anything. It was just like we were constructing this thing like way too early. And also with no kind of like we could probably do to make sure that there's an off switch if something goes wrong, right?
Right.
Or we should probably like make sure that we cap it because, we don't want a stupid amount of money. And it was like there was none of that. So it just went to the moon. And then what happened is somebody found a weakness in it, the DAO hacker, and managed to basically drain whatever, $60 million or some ridiculous amount of money. But they couldn't exit the value because of the way that the things were set up. So there was a structure put in there called a child DAO. So the idea being, if people were like voting for stupid things or whatever, right? If you felt these proposals are just ridiculous, like these guys are idiots, what you could do is say, look, well, me and some other guys, like we're going to go, like we're just going to take our stake off to the side. Thank you very much. And, so that could either be an opt-out or it could be a specialization. Right. Oh, right. These guys want, care about financial things. Oh, but we're going to go and do a bunch of game stuff. Great. And the idea being, well, you could have this galaxy, this galaxy of DAOs that could be created, and it's like, this is the Genesis DAO, and this wonderful galaxy of different activities could go on. But before any of that happened, it got hacked. So. Everything's at the cards off the table. And what you had at that point, though, was that you had this 30-day exit period, right? You make a child DAO and you can't take your money out for that certain amount of time. So you had this period of about a month of the most incredible, intense debate within the Ethereum community of well, what do we do? Do we do anything? Do we not do anything? It was a significant amount of the market cap. I think it was about 15% of all of the Ethereum in the world in this one thing.
Yeah. So
it's well, it's not a bug in the protocol, it's an application bug, So you're sort of thinking, well, if there's if there's an app on your iPhone that steals your money, it's not Apple's fault. They can't necessarily fix that. Or if you've got something, in Windows that's a problem, is it Microsoft's fault? But equally, you did have this potential of saying, well, yeah, it isn't a protocol level bug, but we can actually fix it. You have got this, you can do a soft fork or a hard fork, and you can basically say, hey, hacker, your assumption is that, everyone is so rigid in their thinking that we're just going to let you walk away with the money and do nothing, right? Because of mutability. And that is the thinking of the group that became the Ethereum Classic side, which is, if you look at the history of Bitcoin, innumerable exchanges have got hacked and scams and problems and everything. But, when Mt. Gox happened, you didn't have all the Bitcoiners saying, hey, can we change Bitcoin and blacklist all of the addresses and send ourselves the money back, please? That's never proposed. But that's exactly what happened on the Ethereum side. Was the way I'd express it is there isn't a right and a wrong. It's just that the majority of the Ethereum community at that time were for intervention. They were basically, well, look, we can resolve this. Stealing is wrong. This person is stealing money which would be used to fund the platform development, right? It's going to be a very big negative to the whole of the Ethereum project if all this money goes away rather than being available for spending. And also, if you're of the mindset that that Ether is not money, that it's gas for running computations on a computing platform, then your mindset is saying, well, look, this is just a bug. This is a bug in our platform. Of course we should fix it. It's a bit icky that, we're fixing it one layer too low, but the practical impact to people is really large. So, if we can, we should. And another way that I saw that expressed was saying, what you have with the DAO fork is sort of like a unique thing in human history, that for the first time ever, you've got this, hack, problem, bug thing, and without any need to appeal to government, to law enforcement, to exchanges, there's no appeal to authority. You're just saying the community can decide. No, we're changing our mind. You're not doing that, right? So that's what happened. But to a significant minority, which I think was probably about 15%, I think that's about the split, about 85 to 15% seems to be a bit, the split of irreconcilable difference there, where if you look at things like hash rate or eventual price or number of people or whatever, that's the kind of ratio. So what happened is basically the majority of opinion was, yes, we should intervene. So a hard fork was made on Ethereum, which basically changed what the DAO smart contract did. It made an irregular state transition, which basically inserted different logic in and said, yeah, the DAO smart fork, sorry, the DAO smart contract, yeah, it doesn't do that. What it now does is a refund, which is basically like, hey, here you can ask to get your money back.
Gotcha.
So that was the insertion that happened. That obviously, anathema to the people who became the Ethereum Classic ecosystem. So what happened really was that the foundation and Parity and other client developers, basically made new versions that did this hard fork, and a number of people were like, well, no, we're not doing that. We're not coming with you. We're not coming with you over the hard fork. We're going to keep running that old client, and we do not agree with that change, and we are objecting, we are leaving, we are declaring independence. Screw you, sod the foundation, you've betrayed us. And really you could see that as essentially this group of people basically picking up the corpse off the floor and pumping life back into it.
Yeah.
Just objecting and saying, look, we are going to mine the old fork, and the thing that stayed alive, cobbled along, and a week or so later Poloniacs said, hey, we're listing. And that's where the life, the real life came back in, is it didn't die. Everyone thought it was going to die. It didn't die. And that was a revelation, because to that point, there had never been a minority chain that had survived. There were no instances in history of that ever happening at that point. The assumption was always that because of network effects and whatever, that one side would win and the other would die off. That was what had always happened. And it didn't. And that was a fantastic learning for the whole of blockchain, of saying, if you do have irreconcilable differences of opinion, you do have the right to secede from the union, to get a divorce, right? You don't have to stick in an unhappy marriage forever if you've got that irreconcilable difference, and you don't have to be stuck, inside the oppressive empire. You can give the big fuck you to the big boss man. You can see the universe, so unlike the real world, if you don't like Trump, well, you can live in the other reality, the other America that didn't happen, or you can live in both. If you see values on both sides of an irreconcilable difference, well, here's the thing: you've got tokens for them both. You don't have to pick a winner. It's not like sports teams where you're cheering for your team and boo the others. It doesn't have to be a zero-sum game. So that's what Ethereum Classic is about. Is really that those two visions are now manifesting as ETC and Ethereum 2. And the thing is, they're not mutually exclusive at all. They've actually got quite different value propositions, and they can fit together quite well. As we get more and more interop and interchain and bridges and things going on, well, hey, if you want to use Ethereum Classic as your hard money and use that within an Ethereum smart contract for your scalability, like, that's workable. And all of the layer 2 things which are being built on top of Ethereum now, where you see state channels and optimistic roll-ups and plasma and privacy things, all of those can sit on top of ETC just fine. So I think really the sort of the value proposition I'd say that there is for Ethereum Classic is probably Ethereum Classic has got a better claim to being digital silver than Litecoin does. In that it's doing more. It isn't just, it's basically here's another Bitcoin. What you have with ETC is, it's Bitcoin with smart contracts and state. So your silveriness is the utility that you have from that programmability, and using that utility burns the gas. It consumes the silver. So that is, raising the value. It's got all those same kind of dynamics.
Gotcha. So with ETH's money, or the Ethereum Classic, being more financial focused, does that take a lot of the pressure off the scalability side for Ethereum Classic? And also, how does that relate into, with ETH 2.0 coming out and the backwards compatibility with ETH 2.0, and if you guys are going to potentially chase down that way of staking, or what your consensus model is going to be going down the line?
Well, so I'd say the difference that you have between ETC and Ethereum is that ETC is not going to scale. It will not scale. It never intends to scale. That's a non-aim, in the same way as you have with Bitcoin. The reason being that the key value proposition of those proof of work systems is really the complete decentralization that you have through that proof of work, right? There is nothing that compares to proof of work for the game incentive mechanisms there, the setup that you have between the miners and the coin, and that synergy, and the fact that you've only got a limited amount of throughput, right? As you try and scale more and more, and many different projects are trying to do this in many different ways. Basically, the more scaling that you get, the more compromised the decentralization will be. Like, I think that there's absolutely no way around it, right? Everyone is trying to come up with some proof of stake scheme that somehow, does that Zuko's triangle of somehow going, well, yeah, we can look. We can have thousands or millions of validators, and we can have throughput, and it doesn't compromise the decentralization. I think the laws of physics define that that's impossible. Something which Vlad said at some point was that maybe Casper can explore all of the parts of that triangle, right? That you could have different parameterizations, and look, you can say, hey, you could have more validators, but that will reduce the, and you can move around.
Right.
I don't think it's possible to have all of those things. Now, the single most important thing, the key innovation of blockchain, is the fact that you really have this censorship resistant immutable record, right? And I think nearly all of the alternate kind of attempts at blockchain 2, blockchain 3 kind of flavors are saying, yeah, but there isn't a lot of throughput here, is there? There's not a lot of throughput. So we have to have throughput for the thing to be useful. Therefore, we're going to do X, Y, Z. And I think just about every X, Y, Z that you can come up with is going to compromise that censorship resistance, or it's going to compromise the decentralization. It's going to lead to centralizations in one form or another. That you've got a smaller number of validators, that you've got a dependency on a particular group of people, the governance or the voting or any of these. And I think that nearly all proof of stake systems of any kind are going to be oligarchic in some kind of way. They're going to have, you've got more coins, you get more votes. And those votes are not just on what gets approved. It's on governance, on-chain governance, I think is the worst idea. Because it's basically saying we're going to chain ourselves to the machine. We're making this immutable machine and we're going to chain ourselves to it, right? We're going to make a single instance of it, and the people that have got the most coins are going to have the most decisions, and they're going to make these decisions, and we're all stuck with them, and you can't get out. It's a cabal, and you're in. And in the worst case, you get your sort of EOS kind of setup of saying, right, so we've got 21 validators, and they're all bribing each other, and it's like the worst kind of setup that you could possibly you could think of. That why would any business ever build on top of that? It's inconceivable to me, and I don't think Ethereum 2 is going to be that bad. Obviously not, right? I think it's going to be the best of all possible POS systems, and it's going to get you great scalability. But I think it will be compromised in certain ways, and that doesn't mean it's useless at all. It totally doesn't. But it's serving a different kind of purpose. I think if you are, running these dApps, it's kind of fine. In the main, that saying, look, we're going to have 1,000 or 1,000,000 validators, and they're all going to be ETH holders, and they're all generally going to be good kind of people, I suppose, in some kind of way, and it's probably fine, right? But it isn't the same. It really isn't the same. So what you're going to see from those two approaches is ETC, it's going to stick with the Bitcoin plan. It's yep, we're going to cap it. Yes, you've only got so much throughput, because getting more throughput compromises on the key premise of the thing. And yes, that means you can't run dApps on it. Sorry, CryptoKitties ain't going to scale. But that's fine. Because the thing is, what we can have is, there isn't going to be a single chain. This one chain to rule them all thinking is just garbage. Yeah. This kind of right, well, Bitcoin, because of network effects, all innovation will come into Bitcoin and everything is going to run on chain or whatever. No, that's never going to happen. Because you can't get that volume of stuff anyway. It just logically doesn't make any sense. I mean, it's as crazy as saying, right, databases have been invented, right? Here you go. It's the 1970s. Relational databases have been invented. Let's make the world database, right? We've got a database for the whole world. Would you like to add some rows into the database? Just do some pour it all in, guys. Right? No, obviously not. And it's exactly the same with blockchains, but worse, because blockchains are incredibly slower than conventional databases because of all the consensus work they're doing. Reaching consensus on a transaction globally is a very, very, very expensive operation. I saw an estimate saying running, a little application, a little bit of logic on a single AWS node versus running it on the Ethereum mainnet is perhaps as much as 100 million times more expensive.
Wow,
right? That's the kind of
staggering.
It's a lot. Now, that doesn't mean it's useless. It completely doesn't mean it's useless. But because for some things saying, well, look, these are my assets. These are the deeds to my house. This is a block of gold. This is, whatever, my Bitcoin, my holdings, my savings. Obviously, that's worth the cost. in the same way as all of the overhead that you have, you know, for existing banks and IT infrastructure and all of the software there is in the world that's, you know, tracking all of the things that there are and all of our accounts and everything, you know, yeah, that's really complicated software and it costs huge amounts of money to get all the machines and running everything and doing everything. But you know, it's worth it. And also, you know, there are there's millions or billions of people in the world. So, you know, you get economies of scale. You know, yes, you've got an expensive system, but it deals with millions of people. So you've got those same kind of dynamics there. For blockchains is saying, well, for some things of high value, it's worth the overhead of doing that.
Mm.
But that isn't going to scale to tracking like every button click and event of every app and every game of everything in the whole world.
Mm-hmm.
And this comes to the argument of, say, on Bitcoin scaling and, you know, Bitcoin and Bitcoin Cash and cups of coffee, you know, this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
You know, do you need global consensus on every single point of sale purchase in the world to stick those records into an immutable ledger that the whole world can see and verify forever? You know, it's almost as it is as paranoid as saying, I'm not going to use a US dollar unless I have audited every single use of the US dollar in world trade for the whole of history.
Right.
Because somebody might have cheated somewhere and there might be some inflation in there or something, right? So this dollar I've got might only be worth 99.9999999 cents, right? Because somebody's cheated over here. Like, you know, nobody cares about that. You know, you could even scale back to saying, well, look, I want to know that I haven't got, you know, a fake note, right? That this isn't like counterfeit money. Okay, so like do the tiny slice of stuff saying, well, where has this specific note been in all of its history since it was minted or whatever? You know, that would be millions of times cheaper and smaller than the earlier one, but it's still completely paranoid. Like, who cares? It's $5. You know, you're going to have some fraud. Even with credit cards, you know, they count for like 5% of fraud. You know, people do fraudulent stuff, right? You're never going to achieve perfection. So, I mean, what that means is yeah, you're never going to get to that one chain to rule them all that has the scalability of tracking everything in the world ever. You know, you cannot stick all computer systems on the world in a blockchain because the actual throughput you get, the actual compute capacity, you know, it is like a calculator. It's like a pocket calculator. It's like nothing. So you're going from a world prior to blockchains of, you know, massive data centers. You know, you don't want to have your own computers anymore because there's just, you know, warehouses full of millions of things and, you know, you can just rent it, right? You don't need to own it. Going from that world of massive parallelization to going, okay, can we basically have a pocket calculator for the whole world?
Mm-hmm.
No, you're obviously not going to have any, you know, it's impossible to get scalability that way. But that's fine because it's just a throughput latency trade-off. What you do is the same as you do for anything. Well, do things in parallel. You know, have a raft of machines and they're all doing things, and then you're sort of like reconciling the stuff later. So the world that I see is a world of many chains. Many of them perhaps are going to be a Bitcoin flavor or an Ethereum flavor. You know, you could see Ethereum more as a standard, right? You know, I think to me that's always been the more interesting thing, is thinking about Ethereum as a standard, you know, as a thing that's like the web, like the internet, like TCP, like Android, like Windows or whatever. Like, here's a platform, here's a standard that you can build things on top of, and you want that to be a fairly stable kind of standard. But that doesn't imply that there's a single server for everything. you know, you're going to have many instances of these. So I think you're going to have, and you already do have many public Ethereum chains beyond Ethereum and Ethereum Classic, and an even larger number of private consortium, you know, insider businesses, business backbone kind of stuff. That probably the more impactful way that blockchain is actually going to affect the real world beyond speculation and hodling, and, you know, some dApps, is really very boring things like, right, here's the banks, you know, right, you know, I'm here in Canada, right, well, wouldn't it be great if we had, you know, a blockchain between the commercial banks and with the Bank of Canada, and like when they're settling their money and doing the wire transfers and whatever, right, there's a single ledger for all of that, right? And that comes in to replace 1970s era mainframe horror, you know, and spaghetti mess of these systems all talking to each other and all glued together, that, you know, you do a diagram of it and it would be the mind of a madman, you know, who designs these systems. And it's like, no, that's what happens when you do incremental quarter by quarter IT projects, you know, within corporations.
They need post-it notes.
They do.
So you mentioned, you know, Ethereum Classic has no plans to scale. And so how does that tie into, you know, you mentioned a coffee buying currency, and as well as potentially side chains, because you also mentioned, you know, you don't necessarily need to validate everything to the main chain. So what's kind of the plan and the vision direction for Ethereum Classic in regards to something like a better smart contract capable money that, you know, and that scalability factor?
Yeah, so it's really saying that the way that you get to scalability is through layering. So, you know, there are many of these projects already happening within the broader Ethereum ecosystem, you know, with stake channels, and plasma and optimistic rollups. You know, really the answer is saying you don't need to do these on mainnet, on the layer one. You know, the way that you get to scaling is you do stuff off to the side. So it's a very similar kind of approach as you have with Lightning on Bitcoin. Apart from what you have on Bitcoin is really like, that's the only hope, right? You know, Lightning is great hope for scaling, and it's like that's sort of all there is. And what you have on Ethereum, because you've got programmability of that base layer, is that you can explore numerous different approaches to scalability. But those are all going to be layered on top, and it's really just sort of saying, well, look, you're not going to do on-chain layer one transactions for everything. What you're going to do is you're going to like batch these up. You know, it's going to be kind of like, you know, your gift card kind of model. You know, put some money on your card, go and do a bunch of stuff with it. You know, it's like going into an arcade, and, you know, right, you get your card in the arcade, and then you can go and play your games.
Right.
It's that kind of model, and that kind of approach, you know, can layer multiple times as well. I mean, if you think about types of money that we use in the real world, you know, people don't walk around with bars of gold. You know, it's kind of indisputable that gold is the hardest hard money, you know, and has been for millennia. And, you know, like real estate and maybe, you know, blue chip stocks now. But, you know, that hardness is not a benefit in the real world, right? You know, you don't carry a gold bar around with you. And I mean, that's why fiat currency was created. But beyond state issued fiat, you've got lots of softer forms of money. You know, like, here's my bus ticket, right? I've got my transit pass. You know, that is money. Like, it's a very soft form of money. You know, I don't want to be hoarding bus tickets when the apocalypse comes.
Yeah.
But, you know, they're very useful in the real world. And in the same way as mobile payments, you know, like pretty much all of the payments that we'd make in a developed market now are digital payments. You know, right, I'm paying with PayPal, credit card, debit card, or gift cards, or credit or whatever in any kind of form, you know, all of those are sort of like layers on top of the hardware. And you could see those as being utterly analogous to the layerings that we're talking about here, you know, with layer ones and state channels and so on, is they're just saying hard money is great for being hard money. But for payments, maybe you need something quicker and faster. And it's like, you don't want to put your fortune into that. You know, you don't want to put your life savings into payment mechanisms any more than you'd say, right, okay, I'm going to put my savings on my credit card. Right, what I'm going to do is I'm going to fund my credit card, and that's where I'll keep my life savings. No, that's not its purpose. I mean, you can, but no.
Yeah.
So what you're going to have is layers and layers of like softer and softer money, and you see those in things like you know, in-game assets or whatever. Right, I hold a CryptoKitty. Is a CryptoKitty money? Well, kind of. You know, is owning a DNS registry for a really popular website name, is that money? Kind of. It's kind of an asset. Or, you know, stocks and shares or bonds, or, you know, there are numerous assets, and there isn't really any clean line between what is an asset and what is money. I mean, money is anything that other people will use for value exchange, kind of. And you know, you've got other aspects of money, you know, that you're wanting it to be stable. Hopefully you're wanting it to be a store of value, you want it to be a medium of exchange. You know, these are well trod thought patterns, but I don't think it's necessarily the case that one size fits all. You know, so the thought that Bitcoin is going to win or Ethereum is going to win, and, you know, you're going to have basically that main net is where everything will happen, and that all of economic activity in the whole world is going to, you know, like end up there, or even end up layered on top of there, I think is not the case. You know, you are going to have multiple layer ones of various flavors, and you're going to have numerous layer twos and threes, and they're all just going to be these sort of trade-offs between like throughput and latency and hardness and softness and convenience, and just different engineering trade-offs. And it really depends, well, what's your use case? And many of those won't be public as well. You know, like many things are going to happen on the business side, and it will be like, right, we've got a consortium of supply chain people, and between us we've got a chain where we're tracking components through a supply chain. Never be public. They don't need to be public. Why would they need to be public? And also, we don't want them to be public. Like, they're trade secrets. But the same tech can apply to all of that.
There's so much, I guess you could say, toxicity in the crypto space in regards around tribalism, and their coin is the right coin. And it just, you know, you're highlighting so well how there's different use cases for different applications and different flavors for different preferences. I know you personally are a huge proponent against or for anti-tribalism, yeah?
Yeah, and I mean, something which is a sort of well-known truism within software engineering is no silver bullet. So Fred Brooks wrote a book many years ago. It's probably like 35, nearly 40 years ago now, which was called The Mythical Man Month, which was talking about his experience on large software engineering projects within IBM. So no silver bullet is saying anything that we build, I mean, that was with a software engineering bent, but the same is true of all technology, of all humanity, is like, there are no silver bullets which solve all problems. We've just got a set of tools. You know, here's a hammer. A hammer is good for hitting things. It's not good for sawing things. If you want to saw, you want to saw. You know, if you have got a samurai sword and you give that to some dude down the pub, he's going to hurt himself badly. If you have that in the hands of a master, you can do magic with it. So, you know, there are a range of tools which have a range of different applications, and some of them are dangerous tools. But that's fine if you know what you're doing. But nobody should ever think, wow, I've made a thing and it solves everything. It's magic. There is no magic. There are tools. And what we've got with blockchain is we've made a new tool. Brilliant. There are things that we can do now that we couldn't do before. But that doesn't mean it solves everything. You know, like that 100 million figure, it's a really, really bad tool for doing some things, like really bad. But for some things, it's marvelous. So, you know, what you need to do is sort of go into it with a mindset of saying, well, what's the goal? What are you trying to solve? What are the use cases? Oh, right. Well, maybe this kind of thing would work well for you, or maybe we could do a bit of that, or so on. And it, you know, it's not going into it with this mindset of saying, you know, I've got a hammer, so everything, you know, looks like a nail to me. And I think that is what has happened with maximalism, and specifically Bitcoin maximalism. But you see that appearing in Ethereum as well, and you see, you know, your XRP army, and you know, and on it goes. And I think the reason for that is that what we're building here, while they are, you know, they're just tools, they're just technology, they're just software, they're just protocols. You've got a money motive. You know, if you're a bag holder, you know, you're sitting there and you want your bags to go up. And most of those bag holders, they haven't actually got any ability to make that thing come true. You know, they're not technologists, they're not developers, they're not cryptographers, they're not distributed systems experts. All they can do is cheer from the sidelines, right? Cheer their team, you know. And then what you end up with is you do end up with this sort of weird, like, cult of personality thing, where the primary technical figures or leaders or whatever you want to call them, primary people, they end up getting lionized, and and everything they say is woo, yeah, and you get away from the critical thought that you actually need to make these systems become a reality, which is actually the process of science. It's experiments, it's measuring, it's falsification, hypothesis, experiment, falsification, iterate round the loop. And I'd say that what is happening in the majority of blockchain projects, the ones which aren't complete scams, the majority of them, I think, are people basically exploring the state space. Well, what if we did this? How about if we did that? Or, hey, I've had a thought. Well, what if we did this kind of algorithm or that? Or what if we did, this kind of cryptography? Or and they're just basically people exploring the different options. And there is a flourishing of that right now, which is just marvelous. In a very short space of time, we've gone from a tiny little kernel of people clustered around Bitcoin to an industry building up here, and you've got real engagement from serious players. You've got pretty much all of the Fortune 500s. You've got central banks. You've got nation states going, yeah, this, we need to be aware of this. I don't know what the repercussions. Do we need to regulate? Do we not? Should we be using this ourselves? Or and it's what happens with any new technology. It doesn't fit in the existing rules. It didn't exist. So nobody knows how are you going to balance the public good and data privacy protections and basically ensuring that people don't get scammed. How do you balance that innovation with suitable consumer protection? Because whenever anything happens like this, it's a frothing space for scammers, obviously, because it's unregulated. So here you go, here, give me money for my thing, and then they exit scam or steal your private keys, or the other thing that you have happening is accidental scams, where people legitimately do think, well, maybe this would work. Let's raise some money and try and build this. And then they go, oh shit, it doesn't work. It doesn't work. So that's no different to any startup.
Mm-hmm.
Most startups fail. And it's not because they're like scamming. It's just like they bit off more than they could chew. They didn't have the ability to execute, or they couldn't hire the right people, or their estimates of what the market would be is just like doesn't prove to be the case, or they get cash crunches and they don't deliver enough and in time to get money in, and so all of that mundane stuff happens to any business. So it happened, and you multiply that with a frontier technology that like isn't even finished yet, doesn't even like really work. It's unsurprising that you just get a mess where it's very easy for someone to say, well, look, you guys, you're just scammers. Like you never meant to deliver, and you just stolen our money and run away. When the truth might be like they were really genuinely trying to do it, and they did genuinely think it could work. And the thing is, and maybe it might, like down the line, 2 or 3 years time, you might be like, somebody else picks up the leftovers and like, I think there was a good idea in there, but they didn't know about this, that, and the other. And oh, look, this other thing has happened now. And if we marry this and that, it'll work now. Like a lot of people, a lot of businesses, they're just too early to market. Their timing is just wrong. It's either too early or too late. And I think you've got that, plus the fact that, a lot of these things are still researchy and emergent. So it's very easy to say, you guys are idiots, that'll never work, or, you're scammers and blah, 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 blah. And I think most of the time, that's actually not true.
This is just it. It's such an experimental stage that crypto is at right now, and the entire blockchain space. And you look at something like such established projects, you could say with like ETH 2.0 or Cardano, and how much time, effort, research, development has gone into some of the really the largest smart contract platforms out there. So, you have a new emerging smart contract platform or a new DApp, the chances of them taking a while to be able to essentially innovate on what our world already has, that's a formidable task. And I think
it really is. And I mean, I think, a lot of the Ethereum killers, they won't succeed. Even if they've got really great ideas, they still won't succeed because they won't be able to, get enough market share. This is a phenomenon that you see happening frequently, is something being good enough. So take JavaScript, so JavaScript is a terrible language. It's awful, and it was hacked together in, a couple of weeks or whatever by Brendan Ike. But it was good enough. It's like, oh, you can do a bit of code and you can attach a bit of logic to a button. And what happened is it was good enough that people could actually build useful things on it. And because they built useful things on it, then it's like, oh, but wouldn't it be better if we could improve it a bit? If we could do this to it, if we could do that to it, it's slow. Can't people like make it faster? And what you had is, because the thing is being used, it does iterate to be better. Even if it wasn't like the best choice. And this is the same with something like, VHS and Betamax. Is like, Betamax was the better standard, but it didn't matter because, more people, VHS was good enough and had more take up. And then because you've got a network effect, that's the thing. And then everyone's making more videos on that, and then I can never get the tapes I want, and in the end it just sort of dies off. Like cassette tapes, rubbish standard, rubbish, like they're so poor quality, but they were good enough for a long time, and good enough and works now wins a lot of the time. So I mean, I really think that with Ethereum, which Charles Hoskinson has described on numerous occasions as garbage made in a rush by amateurs, which is harsh, but I think it's true as well. it might be good enough.
Hmm. I think that you absolutely nailed it there. So we're looking forward for Ethereum Classic. What's your next stage? What are you guys looking at in the next little while? Is it the layering solutions? What are you working on? What's the next stage for you guys?
Sure. So what we've got on the brew right now is we've gone through two hard forks in the last few months. In September, we had Atlantis, which brought Ethereum Byzantium opcodes to ETC, because you really hadn't had this period after the DAO fork where ETC was like really underfunded. It was basically like, the whole ecosystem and all the money in the trademark and everything had gone off to Ethereum. And Ethereum Classic was viewed as basically like a protest coin with no developers, a bit of a joke. But what happened, I think, was really that the whole blockchain ecosystem went and lifted up to the degree that the fairly marginal funding that was targeted at Ethereum Classic became enough to actually do some stuff. So we basically like picked up, and with Atlantis last September, that was the first major change for like a couple of years, basically. And all of a sudden, what had been a very like building on Ethereum Classic was like basically like an ideological choice. If you're building on it, you're building on it because you believed, in that. But it's like it's going to be painful. Like, all the tools are going to be weird and nothing's going to work, and you haven't got a good block explorer, and it's just like, you've really like got to be a bit of a masochist to do it. So that story changed as of September. It's like, right, boom, big chunk forward. So caught up with Byzantium. And then in January this year, we had Agartha, which added Constantinople opcodes. So all of a sudden, it's like, right, we're only about 10 months behind. We're like, woo, we're nearly up. So a large number of things then, kind of just work on ETC. So what we have at the moment is we've got two hard forks called Azatlan and Phoenix, which will be activated at the same time this June, it looks like, where we're going to have Istanbul opcodes. So Istanbul is the latest hard fork for Ethereum. So what you're going to have as of this June is something which is completely bytecode compatible. As in, if you have an existing smart contract, you're going to be able to deploy it to ETC instead of ETH. It's just like, here's a drop down. In the same way as say, like, right, we're going to put it to the test net, to the Gourley test net or the main net, or like onto the XDAI chain or wherever. It'll be like, yeah, deploying to ETC is trivial. But the difference that you have is, it's like, imagine you could get a time machine and like you could go back to 2016 and you could get all of the technology, but like none of the bad things happened. So the DAO fork never happened. So it's, you've still got that hard moneyness. There was a monetary policy put in place almost straight after the fork saying, right, we're going to have fixed emission because that's what we value. ICOs never happened on ETC. So all of the bloat, the chain bloat that happened with ICOs, that never happened on ETC. Like CryptoKitties congestion never happened on ETC. So it's like, right, imagine you could have like a different chain version, but it's completely compatible, but it's hard money. And you also have not got that bloat, so that you can actually like sync it from Genesis. What you have on Ethereum is, because of all of the growth and that they have been like chasing that scalability, the actual state on the chain has grown massively. So everyone is basically depending on Infura. Infura is carrying the network. They are processing the majority of the transactions. If Infura turned off tomorrow, Ethereum would die. Like, it's propping the thing up, and it's propping it up with a purpose, which is saying, yeah, but we're making Ethereum too, right? It's like, hold the fort. It's okay.
Yeah.
Right, we're ready to go. Because the code base cannot scale, right? Which is why they're jumping off to do Ethereum 2. But that isn't the priority for ETC. You know, we are not going to scale, and we haven't bloated, and we're not going to bloat. We're going to basically cap it and keep it there. So that's the one exciting thing that we've got is that as of June of this year, we're basically going to be completely compatible. You know, so in terms of a deployment target, it's going to become a viable alternative, you know, for many projects. So I am already and will be talking to basically every project in the whole Ethereum ecosystem saying, hey, you know, ETC, hey, we're here now. Like, you know, we're not like old and broken anymore. We're a viable sibling project. You know, it's not like little brother anymore. It's like, no, like we're grown up now. You know, do you remember when we were kids and, you know, you used to be like a big bully brother and you said, oh, you're stupid and you don't know anything and I'm so clever and big and, you know, I'm the big brother. And it's like, right, all of a sudden, like, you're adults now. Right. And it's like, you know, maybe that little brother, you know, he's pretty savvy. You know, he's learned some tricks, right, from that under, you know, that little brother position. And maybe he's actually quite wise in some ways and can do things a lot better. So we're going to be in this position of ETC is not going to be chasing Ethereum anymore. We're going to be pursuing these parallel paths. And there will be, you know, good portability where, you know, perhaps deployment on both kind of makes sense. And I think when you've got more interchain stuff going, I think for DeFi apps and things of that nature that are really looking to say, here's a thing that I'm looking to hold for a long period of time, ETC is actually just going to be a better choice because we do intend to stay proof of work and to keep that network running for decades in the same way as Bitcoin. Where on the Ethereum side, you've got all this uncertainty about, you know, about Ethereum 2 and the transition and what the timing is going to be on that. And also, well, when we are in Ethereum 2, that will have a different kind of flavor, you know, because it is like an application platform. And I think what you're going to see is that you're going to see a combination of these things where it will be like, right, but we can do like a Bitcoin bridge. You know, you can have, you know, TBTC or Rack BTC or and maybe you or things like DAI, you know, where it's like you don't have to use Ether. Like maybe Ethereum and Ethereum 2 is the platform where a lot of that, like the DApp stuff live, but maybe that's not your money. You know, maybe your money is back on these proof of work layer 1 chains. And you're going like, right, you know, ETC is a hard money asset. Like that's my digital silver. And maybe I do use that within DeFi apps, either directly on ETC or on F2 or on other chains entirely. Or, you know, within completely private systems of saying, well, look, hey, you know, fund up your app with your Bitcoin, with your Ether, with your ETC, whatever. But the actual stuff that you're doing is off on these other systems that sort of reconcile back. You know, I think you're going to have a lot richer of a world, which is going to see, you know, many different chains in use, depending on what they're for, and they're all going to be for different sort of things.
Gotcha. So I feel like there is potentially a perfect storm brewing where, you know, you're going to have the backwards compatibility with Ethereum so that dApps can roll over onto Ethereum Classic. It looks like we're starting to potentially have a bull run. So, you know, new users coming on, but potentially launching more network activity. And with Ethereum 2.0, definitely not looking, who knows when it's going to launch, but let's just assume that it doesn't launch in time and, you know, for this big, massive amount of potential network congestion on Ethereum. How does that all play? Because, you know, if you're going to dApps and saying, you know what, we're potentially another chain that you can pop onto, or dApps are just seeing, hey, we could go to Ethereum Classic. Does that not potentially switch it from the money aspect, or does that now introduce chain bloat and congestion onto your own chain as well? And what's that angle that you're trying to take?
Well, I think the way that's going to play out is really the messaging being, well, hey, you know, you can deploy your dApps to ETC, you know, for now, with the understanding that the scaling is not going to happen on layer one. So I think many dApps which are now looking to launch on layer one, that's not what they're going to end up at. Like maybe it's okay and it can, you know, it can work for a year or two, but I think they will get forced out. You know, basically like the higher value transactions are going to be the ones that happen down. You know, you are going to end up with a sort of a settlement layer kind of pattern, or like you know, a registry, like, you know, like your DNS-y kind of things. But basically like, you know, your money, your higher value transfers, your registry-ish kind of things, but not high throughput dApps. Like I think all of the dApps are going to end up on layer twos, even for F2. You know, I think that you're going to have dApp chains. I think it's inevitable, and you see that happening, say, with Aragon. You know, so Aragon have announced, right, that they are doing Aragon chain, that they're working with Cosmos, and they're basically going to have, you know, a chain specific to Aragon for running, you know, their own governance on that. And a primary reason for that is just throughput. You know, that they've got DAOs and they're doing votes and shoveling things around, and you know, it's quite intensive throughput you need on that. And the thing is, if you're sharing that compute capability with a bunch of other apps, you know, that's never going to work. I mean, I think this is sort of like a bit of a flaw in the thinking of many of these proof of stake or sharding kind of systems, is thinking, well, look, you know, if we shard it up enough, if we have a different consensus that's got more throughput, you know, that it's going to be enough. It's never going to be enough. Like, you know, these systems are by design massively slower than any centralized solution. You know, you're never going to like run significant computation on these things. It's just, it doesn't make sense, you know. And what you're going to have with these here, you know, here is a public permissionless dApp platform thing. Everyone is sharing the resource, and you just cannot have a predictable quality of service. You know, your CryptoKitties bloat situation, like that stuff is going to happen again and again and again. And it doesn't matter if you've got loads of shards. So where does the stuff go on the shards then? Can things move around based on demand? I don't think they can. And then if you're on the same shard, obviously you've got better communication, right? You know, like being all in the same place is this great synergy of the stuff being close together. Anything on a different shard, you know, that is a different, more complicated thing to coordinate. So it's going to be worse. You know, the user experience across shard is intrinsically has to be worse than on a shard. So then you're going to get popular shards. You're going to be like, oh, you know, can we be on the same shard as this, you know, very popular kind of service? You know, I don't see that there's any way to solve that. It's just a logical flaw in the whole pattern. So I think what, you know, the solution to that is dApp chains, or not blockchains at all. You know, something else that then is like an exchange-like pattern of interfacing in it, but you're sort of like on the exchange. You know, because you could think of an exchange as being a layer 2, really.
For sure.
They are. Like, that's your scalability that you've got with Bitcoin, is that most of the stuff is actually happening on the exchange and only like actually gets resolved down onto the actual real chain in big batches of stuff. You know, so that is a layer 2.
Right. It's like a really risky side chain.
Right. But all of these patterns, you know, they are risky because, you know, you haven't got that same security guarantee, but the trade-off can be absolutely worth it. You know, there are value points on that spectrum between I'm running a thing on an AWS node and I trust that nothing's going wrong, versus I am the most paranoid person in history and I'm going to validate like everything forever. Right. You know, there's got to be value points somewhere on that spectrum. But yeah, I mean, I think any of those sharding kind of solutions where you're sort of sharing a common space, you're not going to get predictable quality of service, and you are going to have scenarios of, something bad has happened, there's some busyness today and it's going to screw up, your other. So what I think that is going to mean is, if you're having something of the scale of an exchange or whatever, right, we're running a stock exchange, right, we're running the Toronto Stock Exchange on chain. It's just utterly unacceptable to say, well, look, there was a new there was a new special pack in CryptoKitties today, so sorry, your trades haven't gone through.
Mm-hmm.
That's not going to happen. Any serious big scale business is never going to use these systems directly. They can use systems like them. They can have layers on top and reconcile and pin in, and I think that's the reality. So I don't really know what that means for your sharded solutions. Is stuff going to go on a sharded layer 1? Like, are you going to have things deploying at scale on those ever? Or is that like, a direction that doesn't work, that really you need to scale up, not across?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it remains to be seen, but I think the more interesting scalability is going to happen through layering.
Yeah. And I know, like we're talking about, there's so many different flavors, experiments that people are trying out. And I really appreciate and respect and look up to the flavor and path that you guys at Ethereum Classic are doing. And I really want to say thanks for taking a slice out of your incredibly busy schedule to come sit down and have a chat.
No worries. You're very welcome.
All right. And so to anyone who's listening on either Uptrend, on Facebook, podcast, or anywhere else online, check you guys next time.